Is Republican Congressman Mark Walker of North Carolina. He's also chairman of the Republican Study Committee. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Sure, Julie. Good to be with you.
So Republicans are hoping for a big win on tax reform by year's end. How optimistic are you that House Republicans will get tax reform done?
Well, we use the terms optimistic and hopeful very much these days in Washington, D.C. This is a must. Forget the adjectives that describes the path that we are considering. This has to happen, and I believe that sense of urgency is being felt from constituents all the way to Washington, D.C.
Okay, well, when you speak about things that have to happen, unfortunately, Obamacare, that had to happen too. I mean, Republicans promised that they would get that done, and it didn't. And we're hoping not to see a repeat in history. I want to talk about some of the tax provisions, which include collapsing the current 7 personal tax brackets to just 3, meaning 12, 25, and 35%, nearly doubling the standard deduction.
Right.
Who's most going to benefit by this?
The middle class is definitely going to benefit from this. One of the things that Chuck Schumer released this week, where he was completely wrong, was talking about that 10% bracket would go up to 12%, when actuality is the 10% would go to 0. This is going to impact, and away from the talking points, this is disposable income that goes back into the families, maybe a car payment, taking your family out to eat or to the movies a couple times a month. This is something that's very important that we need to continue to message on, and I think it's beginning to resonate with American people.
Trump economic advisor Gary Cohn addressed whether this is indeed going to benefit one class versus the other. And I want to throw this up on the screen because he says that we're doing an awful lot to help hardworking Americans. We took the 15% tax rate and lowered it to 12, as you just mentioned. So if you look at that in its entirety, we have really helped out lower income earners. Now, there are some that argue that if you basically lower the tax rate, it's not just going to help the low income and middle class. I mean, the wealthy are going to benefit too, or are they not?
Well, across the board, if you look at the people who are paying the most taxes, if you make even a tweak on the upper end, it's going to be some kind of benefit. But percentage-wise, it's going to be the middle class that benefits the most. And going back a little bit earlier where you talked about Obamacare, one of the things that I'd commend Speaker Ryan and Kevin McCarthy and the leadership is the rollout, the organizational structure. Kevin Brady deserves a lot of credit. But with the debacle of the Obamacare rollout, I believe this was a huge difference that is bringing unifier. We have 157 members in the Republican Study Committee, about 20 Freedom Caucus members, as well as some Tuesday group. And one of the things that I was watching at our mini retreat this week was how well those two sides or factions were buying in. And it seems to be a universal idea that this is the time, the urgency, and the framework of this has really brought us all together.
You helped actually take the lead to get health care passed in the House. Here's the problem. What works in the House doesn't always necessarily work in the Senate, as you just pointed out, health care. So how can the Senate avoid the same pitfalls seen in the health care overhaul?
Well, I believe we tried to reach out a little bit earlier this time. When we passed Obamacare repeal, the Senate, in really a condescending way, said, well, that's all well and good. We'll get back together and do our own thing. It didn't work out that well. That's why there needs to be increasingly pressure on Mitch McConnell to engage. If you look at this last Alabama Senate race, this was a referendum on Mitch McConnell. He has to be willing and being able to lead in a way that it creates wins, not just rhetoric.
Paul Ryan says, and I'm quoting here, let's throw his quote up on the screen, that our framework includes the explicit commitment that tax reform will protect the low-income and middle-income households, not the wealthy and well-connected. Do you agree with that assessment? And then what do you say to all of those that are sitting at home hoping that the GOP will follow through on its promises, specifically on making health care affordable? Because at first the priority was health care. Tax reform and health care, they go hand in hand.
Yes, exactly right. We laid out 3 promises, the Republican Study Committee and our steering committee this past week. We talked about 3 things: securing the border, we talked about repealing health care, but also reforming the tax code. Those are 3 promises that we're going to continue. If we have to work piece by piece or bill by bill to take apart the ills of Obamacare, we cannot look the other way. In my home state, 94 of the 100 counties are down to one option. The employer mandates, they're struggling with this. We cannot look the other way, but at the same time, We have to fulfill the promise. Somebody asked me the other day, what does this mean for leadership if tax reform does not get across the board? I said, really, it impacts the entire conference. This is the first time that back-to-back Congresses, the American public have elected 240 or more Republicans.
Right.
If we do not pass this tax reform, I believe the results will be seen next year.
And the results of not passing some kind of overhaul on health care will be catastrophic. As you recall, Democrats were saying that, with the Senate proposed bill that millions would lose health care, and Nancy Pelosi said people would die. It is actually quite the contrary. People are going to die because they cannot afford health care. People's health care costs are the equivalent of their mortgages and more. And now so many people are uninsured. So that is on the heads of those in Congress and in the Senate. And I guess a last word to you, to those Democrats who are crying foul, saying that Obamacare is actually going to, help these people when in fact it's going to hurt them.
Julie, there are many people across this great country that have Obamacare but have no health care provider. That's a shame. One last word, our hearts and prayers are still with the people in Puerto Rico. That is something that we have to continue to work on. The House passed a tax relief bill this past Friday. Those folks are still in our hearts and minds.
Yes, they certainly are, and our prayers to all of them for quick recovery. Mark Walker, a congressman from North Carolina, thank you so much, sir.